Unmasking the mysterious host, family secrets explode at Eerie Mansion dinner. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Invitation. Emma Harris was no stranger to solitude. As a writer who thrived in the quiet confines of her small, cluttered apartment, she had long embraced a life of isolation. Her days were spent surrounded by stacks of books and half-finished manuscripts, her evenings a symphony of typewriter clacks and the occasional, wistful sigh. But one chilly autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled outside her window, an unexpected letter arrived that shattered her routine. The envelope was elegant, with a deep green wax seal stamped with an intricate crest she didn't recognize. Emma's fingers traced the edges of the seal with curiosity before she carefully peeled it away. Inside, the card was equally elaborate, embossed with gold leaf and inscribed with elegant script. The message was brief yet enigmatic. You are cordially invited to an evening of revelations. Join us for dinner at the Harrington Manor on the evening of October 31st. Family matters await. There was no signature, no indication of who had sent the invitation or why Emma, in particular, had been chosen. Her heart skipped a beat. The mention of family was enough to stir a mixture of apprehension and hope. Emma hadn't seen her relatives in years marked by unspoken grievances and unresolved issues. The notion of reconnecting, despite the ambiguous nature of the invitation, was tantalizing. As the days ticked by, Emma found herself increasingly absorbed by the mysterious invite. She reflected on her strained relationships with her family, each memory a jigsaw piece of past arguments, silent treatments, and unresolved conflicts. The anticipation of the evening both thrilled and terrified her. She wondered what prompted this sudden overture. Was it a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a trap set by the host for reasons unknown? On the day of the event, Emma stood before her wardrobe, grappling with the choice of what to wear. Her reflection in the mirror was pensive, her usual casual attire replaced by something more formal. She settled on a deep blue gown, hoping it would convey both respect and a touch of her own dignified resolve. She donned her coat, feeling the chill of the evening air seep through the fabric as she made her way to the cab waiting outside. The drive to Harrington Manor was long and winding, taking her through a landscape that grew increasingly desolate as the city's lights faded. The sky above was a blanket of stars, and the moon cast an eerie glow on the narrow, twisting road that led to the mansion. Emma's mind raced with questions and uncertainties, each turn of the road adding to her mounting anxiety. When the cab finally pulled up to the entrance of Harrington Manor, Emma's breath caught in her throat. The mansion loomed large, an imposing structure with dark, ivy-clad walls and tall, arched windows that seemed to watch her arrival with an unsettling gaze. The grandeur of the estate was both impressive and intimidating, and she felt a shiver of trepidation as she stepped out of the cab. A butler in a traditional black suit greeted her at the door, his face inscrutable as he took her coat and led her inside. The interior of the mansion was a stark contrast to the bleak exterior. Rich tapestries adorned the walls, and the flickering light of ornate chandeliers cast warm, dancing shadows across the polished marble floors. The scent of old wood and faintly burning candles mingled in the air, creating an atmosphere that was both luxurious and disquieting. Emma was led through a grand hallway, its high ceilings and elaborate decor evoking a bygone era of opulence. The butler stopped at the entrance to the dining room and gestured for Emma to enter. With a deep breath, she stepped into the room. The dining room was as magnificent as the rest of the house, but it carried an air of disquiet. The long, polished table was set with fine china and crystal glasses that caught the light in a dazzling array of colors. The room was dimly lit, with only the soft glow of candles casting a flickering light on the faces of the guests already present. Emma's heart raced as she took in the scene, noting the presence of her estranged family members, each looking as apprehensive and curious as she felt. Emma's eyes scanned the room, and she saw her brother Jonathan, his expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. Her sister-in-law Olivia sat beside him, her face a mask of polite indifference. The sight of them stirred a wave of mixed emotions within Emma: nostalgia, resentment, and a hesitant hope for reconciliation. The butler silently retreated, leaving Emma to face the gathering on her own. As she took a seat at the table, the atmosphere grew thicker with tension. The soft murmur of conversation ceased as the guests turned their attention to her arrival, each face etched with curiosity and hidden agendas. Emma took her place, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to steady her nerves. The evening stretched before her, a complex tapestry of familial discord and unresolved secrets. The promise of revelations hung in the air, mingling with the opulence of the setting and the shadows of uncertainty. As the first course was served, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would bring more than just a dinner. It would unearth buried truths and perhaps reshape the fractured bonds of her family. The evening had just begun, and Emma was about to discover whether it would lead to healing or further heartbreak. Chapter 2: A Reunion of Shadows. As Emma settled into her seat at the long dining table, the murmur of conversation among the guests resumed, though it was laced with an undercurrent of tension. The sight of her family members, long absent from her life, stirred a mixture of nostalgia and unease. The faces around her were a blend of the familiar and the foreign, each bearing the weight of years spent apart and the scars of past grievances. Jonathan, her older brother, sat at the head of the table. His once boyish features were now hardened by time and experience, his eyes sharp and wary. Olivia, his wife, occupied the seat next to him. Her demeanor was poised, but Emma noticed a subtle tightness in her smile, a hint of something more beneath the surface. Their interactions were civil, but the warmth that once characterized their relationship seemed to have faded into a cold politeness. Across from them, Emma's cousin Clara sat, her gaze drifting nervously around the room. Clara had always been the wild spirit of the family, her eccentricity both charming and alarming. Tonight, however, she appeared more subdued, her eyes flickering with unease as she fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. Beside her, Emma's estranged Aunt Margaret, a woman known for her sharp tongue and fierce independence, sat with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on a spot somewhere between her plate and the wall. As Emma looked around, she could sense that each person at the table was grappling with their own thoughts, their own fears. The air was thick with unspoken resentments, and every word spoken seemed carefully measured, as if each guest were playing a part in a performance they had long rehearsed, but never quite perfected. The conversation began with polite inquiries and small talk, but Emma could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. The way the guests spoke, the forced laughter, the way eyes darted to avoid direct contact, it all contributed to a sense of underlying discomfort. Emma's attempts to engage in light conversation were met with brief, guarded responses. It was clear that the years of separation had not healed the wounds. Instead, they had deepened them, leaving a chasm that now seemed insurmountable. The first course was served, a delicate arrangement of appetizers that did little to ease the tension. As the guests nibbled on their food, their conversations drifted to safer topics: weather, recent news, and inconsequential anecdotes. Yet beneath the surface of these benign topics lay a palpable strain, a barely concealed anger and suspicion that Emma could not ignore. As the evening progressed, Emma began to notice subtle, unsettling signs that the gathering was far from ordinary. The mansion, with its grandiose furnishings and historical charm, seemed to harbor secrets of its own. The walls, adorned with faded portraits and elaborate tapestries, seemed to close in on her, as if the very structure of the house were complicit in the evening's mystery. At one point, a loud crash interrupted the uneasy dinner. Emma and the others turned to see that a large portrait had fallen from its place on the wall. The frame lay shattered on the floor, and the face of the missing family member, whom Emma had only heard about in whispers, stared out at them with a haunting gaze. The room fell silent, and for a moment, all eyes were on the fallen portrait. The butler, who had been discreetly moving about the room, quickly reattached the portrait and offered a curt apology. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but the incident was quickly brushed aside, as if acknowledging it would give it more significance than it deserved. Later, as the main course was served, Emma noticed a strange noise coming from somewhere within the mansion. It was a faint, rhythmic thumping, as if someone, or something, was moving about in the walls or upstairs. The sound was intermittent, barely perceptible over the clinking of silverware and muted conversation. but it added to the growing sense of unease that Emma felt. The evening wore on, and the sense of foreboding deepened. Emma's attempts to engage her family members in more meaningful conversation were met with vague responses and evasive glances. It was as though each guest was holding back, their true feelings masked by a veneer of politeness and propriety. As dessert was served, the guests seemed to relax slightly, the tension giving way to a more subdued atmosphere. Yet, Emma could not shake the feeling that the true purpose of the evening had yet to be revealed. The host's presence, though not yet directly acknowledged, seemed to loom over the gathering like an invisible specter. The clock struck 9, and the butler announced that the next course would be served shortly. Emma, her curiosity piqued and her anxiety heightened, could not help but wonder what lay ahead. The mansion's grandeur, its opulent setting, and the enigmatic invitation all pointed to a night that would unravel deeper secrets and darker truths. As she glanced around the room, Emma's gaze caught the flicker of a candlelight reflecting off a peculiar object in the corner of the room. It was a small, ornate box, partially hidden behind a draped curtain. The box seemed to pulse with a hidden energy, a subtle, almost imperceptible hum that added to the evening's growing sense of mystery. Emma's mind raced with questions. What was the purpose of this gathering? What secrets lay hidden in the depths of this ancient mansion? And what role did each family member play in the unfolding drama? As the guests continued their subdued conversation, Emma's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of the final course. The butler, his expression as inscrutable as ever, served the dessert with practiced precision. Emma took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever revelations the evening had in store. The night was still young, and the shadows of the past had only just begun to stir. Chapter 3: Secrets Unveiled. The dinner progressed with an uneasy semblance of normalcy. The courses served with meticulous precision, but the air remained thick with latent tension. Emma could feel the weight of unspoken grievances and buried truths hovering over the table. As the dessert course was cleared away, a sense of foreboding grew stronger, almost palpable. The conversation, once superficial, began to drift toward more personal territory. Jonathan, usually reserved, initiated a discussion about past family conflicts, seemingly intent on dredging up old wounds. The mention of a failed business venture from years ago opened the floodgates. Olivia, her voice tight with suppressed anger, recalled bitter arguments and financial struggles that had strained their relationship. Emma's cousin Clara, typically the family's emotional anchor, looked increasingly uncomfortable as past family scandals were laid bare. As the discussion grew more intense, Emma noticed something peculiar. The host, whose identity remained shrouded in mystery, seemed to have an uncanny knowledge of each guest's private life. It was as if they were orchestrating the evening with the sole purpose of unearthing hidden truths. Emma's unease deepened as she listened to the guests' confessions, realizing that the host knew far more than they should about each person's most guarded secrets. The evening's tension reached a crescendo when the lights in the dining room dimmed abruptly. A hush fell over the guests as an eerie silence enveloped the room. Emma's heart raced as she glanced around, trying to discern the cause of the sudden change. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows on the walls, adding to the growing sense of unease. Without warning, a voice filled the room, coming from an unseen speaker. The voice was smooth and commanding, its tone carrying an unsettling calmness. It was clear that the voice belonged to the host, though they remained hidden from view. "Good evening, dear family," the voice began, its echo resonating through the room. "I trust you are enjoying your dinner." The guests exchanged nervous glances, their faces pale under the dim light. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as the voice continued. "Tonight, I have brought you together not just for a reunion, but for a reckoning. The time has come to confront the shadows of your past and to address the secrets that have long been buried." The voice paused, allowing the words to sink in. The atmosphere in the room shifted from uneasy curiosity to outright dread. Emma's gaze darted around the table, catching glimpses of her family members' reactions, expressions of shock, anger, and fear. The voice resumed, now tinged with a note of finality. "You may wonder who I am and why I have taken it upon myself to orchestrate this evening. I am someone who knows your stories well, perhaps better than you know them yourselves. I am here to ensure that you face the consequences of your actions and that the truths you have avoided are brought into the light." At that moment, a screen lowered from the ceiling, and the room was illuminated by the glow of a video projection. The image was a series of family photographs, each accompanied by a brief, dramatic narration of past scandals and betrayals. The stories ranged from financial ruin to personal betrayals, each revelation adding to the mounting tension in the room. Emma watched in horror as her own secrets were exposed, some of which she had hoped would never see the light of day. The projector displayed a photo of her younger self with a caption detailing her estrangement from her family, a result of a falling out over a failed business venture. The shame and regret she felt were palpable. Her face flushed with embarrassment as she realized that her personal failures were being used as part of this cruel charade. As the final photograph faded from the screen, the voice on the speaker grew more insistent. "It is time to address these issues. Each of you has a role to play in this family drama, and it is up to you to confront the truth and make amends." The revelation of the host's intentions acted as a catalyst, igniting a firestorm of conflict among the guests. Accusations flew across the table, voices raised in anger and betrayal. Jonathan and Olivia clashed over old grievances, their argument escalating into a heated exchange of blame and resentment. Clara, overwhelmed by the intensity of the evening, broke down in tears, her sobs adding to the cacophony of chaos. Emma tried to intervene, her voice barely audible over the din of arguments. She sought to mediate, to bring a semblance of calm to the tumultuous scene, but her efforts were overshadowed by the raw emotions unleashed by the host's revelations. The night, once meant for reconciliation, had devolved into a battlefield of accusations and hurt feelings. As the arguments reached a fever pitch, the mansion seemed to echo with the sounds of discord. The walls, once silent witnesses to the evening's drama, now seemed to resonate with the intensity of the family's conflicts. The thumping noise from earlier grew louder, reverberating through the corridors as if the house itself were responding to the chaos. In the midst of the uproar, Emma noticed a peculiar detail. The small, ornate box she had seen earlier was now missing from its place behind the curtain. Her curiosity was piqued, and she felt a sudden, unsettling urge to find out what had become of it. The box's disappearance seemed to add another layer of mystery to the already fraught evening. As the clock approached midnight, the arguments gradually subsided, leaving the guests exhausted and emotionally drained. The voice on the speaker fell silent, leaving the room in an uneasy stillness. The host's presence remained a tantalizing mystery, their identity still concealed as the evening drew to a close. Emma sat at the table, her mind reeling from the revelations and the tumultuous events of the night. The family, now fractured and weary, faced the daunting task of addressing their pasts and reconciling their differences. The host's machinations had laid bare the deep-seated issues within the family, but the path to resolution remained uncertain. As the guests slowly departed, their faces etched with the marks of the evening's emotional turmoil, Emma felt a profound sense of unease. The night had revealed hidden truths and unresolved conflicts, but it had also left her with more questions than answers. The host's true motives remained shrouded in mystery, and the mansion's secrets were far from fully uncovered. Emma's mind raced with the implications of the night's events. The mansion, the mysterious host, and the fractured family dynamics all converged into a complex web of intrigue and suspense. As she prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that the evening's revelations were only the beginning of a much larger, more sinister story. Chapter 4. The host's true motive. The night's turmoil left Emma and the remaining guests in a state of anxious disarray. As the echoes of heated arguments and exposed secrets lingered in the grand dining hall, the realization that their host remained an enigma began to weigh heavily on them. With the immediate confrontation over, Emma and her relatives found themselves grappling with a more pressing concern, identifying the mysterious orchestrator of their collective distress. The mansion, an imposing structure cloaked in shadow and mystery, offered few comforts. Its vast, labyrinthine corridors and ornate rooms now seemed to conceal more than just furniture and relics of the past. The guests, driven by a mixture of curiosity and dread, began to search the mansion with renewed urgency. Clues, if any existed, had to be buried somewhere within the opulent but foreboding walls. Emma, driven by a mix of resolve and trepidation, decided to explore a seldom-used wing of the mansion that she had glimpsed earlier in the evening. The corridor was lined with faded portraits and dust-laden furniture, each item hinting at a bygone era. Her footsteps echoed softly in the empty hallways, amplifying her sense of isolation. As she moved cautiously through the dimly lit passages, she noticed a door partially concealed behind a heavy drapery. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. Her heart quickened, and she pushed the door open with a creak, stepping into a room shrouded in shadows. The room was a study, cluttered with old books, documents, and personal effects. Emma's eyes were drawn to a large desk in the center, its surface strewn with yellowed papers and leather-bound volumes. Her attention was immediately caught by an old journal resting on the desk, its cover embossed with intricate patterns. The journal seemed out of place amid the disarray, as if it were waiting to be discovered. With trembling hands, Emma opened the journal and began to read. The entries were written in a neat, meticulous script, detailing a history of familial conflict and betrayal. The deeper she read, the more she realized that the journal's contents were not just a record of events, but a detailed account of personal vendettas and grievances. The pages revealed a pattern of resentment that had festered over years. The author, whose identity was revealed in the final entries, had a long-standing grudge against Emma's family. The journal detailed a series of calculated plans to expose and exploit their deepest secrets. The host, as it turned out, was someone with a deeply personal vendetta, a member of the extended family who had been wronged and had since sought retribution. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps as she reached the final entry. It spoke of an elaborate scheme to force the family into a reckoning, to bring their hidden flaws and unresolved issues into the open. The author's resentment had driven them to orchestrate this evening of revelations, hoping to dismantle the family's carefully maintained facade. As Emma absorbed the chilling details, the mansion seemed to come alive with a new, menacing energy. The realization that their host harbored such profound animosity cast a dark shadow over the gathering. The once grandiose halls now felt oppressive, the walls seemingly closing in on the trapped guests. Determined to share her findings, Emma raced back to the main hall, where the other guests had gathered in uneasy silence. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she recounted the journal's revelations. The guests, initially skeptical, were soon gripped by a mixture of fear and disbelief as Emma detailed the host's vendetta and their calculated plans. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. What had been an evening of heated arguments and exposed secrets now felt like a prelude to a more sinister turn of events. The guests, now aware of the host's true intentions, faced the grim reality that they were in grave danger. The mansion was no longer just a setting for personal drama, it had become a trap. The first signs of escalating threats began to manifest. The power flickered, casting intermittent darkness across the rooms, and the previously calm atmosphere turned volatile. The mansion seemed to groan with a sinister resonance, its creaking floors and rattling windows amplifying the growing sense of dread. Emma and the other guests knew they had to act quickly. The journal's revelations had made it clear that their host was intent on causing maximum distress and harm. They had to find a way to escape the mansion and uncover the full extent of the host's plans. In a desperate bid to regain control of the situation, the group began to search for exits and potential means of escape. Their efforts were hindered by the mansion's labyrinthine layout and the increasingly ominous presence of their unseen adversary. Each step felt fraught with danger, and every sound seemed to carry an undertone of menace. The guests, now united by a common goal, worked together to navigate the mansion's darkened corridors. Their journey was fraught with peril, as they encountered obstacles designed to thwart their efforts. Hidden traps, locked doors, and sudden, unnerving noises all contributed to the growing sense of urgency and fear. Emma, driven by both fear and determination, led the search for any remaining clues or means of escape. Her mind raced with the implications of the host's actions and the looming threat that seemed to hang over them. The mansion, once a symbol of opulence and grandeur, had transformed into a prison of their own making. As the search continued, the guests' resolve was tested by the escalating threats and the pervasive sense of danger. The realization that their host's plans were more far-reaching and malicious than they had initially imagined added a new layer of tension to their struggle for survival. Emma's thoughts were consumed by the need to escape and the desire to uncover the full truth behind their host's motivations. The mansion, with its hidden rooms and dark secrets, had become a battleground where survival and revelation were intertwined. The chapter ended with Emma and the guests grappling with the grim reality of their situation. The host's true motives had been revealed, but the full extent of their plans remained unclear. The danger was far from over, and the mansion's secrets were far from fully uncovered. The guests faced an uncertain future as they continued their desperate quest for escape and understanding. Chapter 5: Confronting the Past. The mansion had become a battleground of fear and revelations, its opulent facade now a backdrop for a drama of unprecedented intensity. The guests, their faces etched with the strains of their perilous night, had finally assembled in the grand ballroom, determined to face their mysterious tormentor. The room, once a symbol of elegance, now felt oppressive, its grandeur overshadowed by the tension that filled the air. Emma stood at the forefront, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. The journal's revelations had left her with more questions than answers, but she knew that this confrontation was inevitable. The host's manipulations and the evening's orchestrations had brought them to this critical moment. The grand chandelier above cast flickering shadows across the room, heightening the sense of unease as the guests awaited their adversary. The doors of the ballroom swung open with a dramatic creak, and the room fell into a tense silence. The host, cloaked in a dark, hooded robe, emerged from the shadows, their face obscured. The figure's presence was imposing, their steps deliberate and measured. The air grew colder, as if the very walls of the mansion were holding their breath. Emma's resolve solidified as she took a step forward. "It's time to end this charade. We need answers, now." The host, their voice a low, menacing whisper, began to speak. "Answers? You want answers? Very well, but understand that truth comes with a price." As the host's voice filled the room, the guests' apprehension turned to outrage. The host slowly removed their hood, revealing a face that none of the guests had expected. It was Eleanor Winters, the family's estranged cousin, who had been absent for years. Her eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed no emotion as she surveyed the room. "You?" Emma's voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "You're behind all this?" Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "Yes, it is I. I orchestrated this evening to force you all to confront the reality of your actions. For years, you have lived your lives in ignorance of the damage you've caused." Eleanor's revelation sent shockwaves through the room. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing to piece together the connections. Emma's thoughts churned as she remembered the stories of Eleanor. Stories of betrayal and abandonment that had once been a distant memory. Eleanor began to recount the family's history with a bitter edge, her voice laced with resentment. She spoke of her exclusion from family gatherings, the silent judgment she had endured, and the personal sacrifices she had made. The more she revealed, the clearer it became that her grievances had fueled her elaborate scheme. The guests were forced to confront their own roles in Eleanor's suffering. The arguments and secrets of the past that had been buried and forgotten were now laid bare. Emma saw her own shortcomings reflected in the accusations and revelations. Her estrangement from the family, her avoidance of conflict, and her failure to mend broken bonds were all part of the narrative Eleanor had crafted. As Eleanor continued to speak, the tension in the room reached a boiling point. The guests, now acutely aware of their collective failings, began to argue among themselves. The facade of civility crumbled as old grievances resurfaced. Blame was cast, accusations were hurled, and the atmosphere grew increasingly chaotic. Amid the turmoil, Emma's thoughts turned inward. She reflected on her own actions and inactions, her avoidance of uncomfortable truths, and her own contribution to the family's dysfunction. The confrontation forced her to grapple with her own failures and seek a path to redemption. Enough. Emma's voice cut through the chaos. We can't change the past, but we can confront it and try to make amends. The room fell silent as the guests and Eleanor turned to face Emma. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Emma's plea for reconciliation and self-reflection resonated with the others, and a shift in the atmosphere became palpable. The confrontation with Eleanor had reached its climax. Her motives, born of deep-seated resentment and a desire for revenge, had been exposed. The guests, now fully aware of the extent of their collective failures, faced the reality of their actions and the consequences they had wrought. In the aftermath of the dramatic showdown, the immediate danger began to dissipate. The mansion, once a symbol of malevolence, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. The guests, their emotions spent and their minds reeling, began to process the revelations and the resolution of their conflict. Eleanor, having achieved her goal of exposing the family's secrets and forcing them to confront their past, seemed to lose some of her earlier resolve. The bitterness in her eyes softened, and she appeared to grapple with her own role in the night's events. Her quest for vengeance had revealed the harsh truths of the family's history, but had also exposed her own vulnerabilities. Emma, along with the other guests, began to take stock of the damage and the lessons learned. The evening had been a catalyst for self-examination and confrontation. As the guests began to piece together their fractured relationships and seek forgiveness, the mansion, once a prison of secrets and deception, began to take on a new significance. The chapter closed with a sense of cautious optimism. The immediate threat had been resolved, but the process of healing and reconciliation was only beginning. Emma and the guests faced the daunting task of rebuilding their relationships and mending the rifts that had long divided them. As the mansion's grandeur was gradually restored, the family's journey toward understanding and redemption was just beginning. The night's events had exposed the deep-seated issues that had plagued them for years, but it also provided an opportunity for growth and change. The chapter ended with Emma standing alone in the grand ballroom, reflecting on the evening's events. The shadows of the past had been confronted, and the future lay ahead, uncertain but filled with the potential for renewal. Chapter 6: The Aftermath and New Beginnings. The night of revelations had passed, and the once mysterious mansion now stood silent, its grandeur somewhat tarnished by the weight of the events that had transpired. As dawn's first light filtered through the heavy curtains, the guests began to stir from their uneasy sleep. The opulent surroundings of the mansion, which had been the stage for their turmoil, now seemed more like a somber witness to their trials. The early hours were marked by an unusual stillness. The family members, still grappling with the shock of the previous night, moved through the mansion in a daze. Each person was lost in their thoughts, reflecting on the harsh truths that had emerged. The grandeur of the mansion, once a symbol of their collective wealth and status, now seemed an ironic backdrop to their collective shame and the beginnings of reconciliation. Emma walked through the halls with a sense of somber determination. The ordeal had left its mark on her, but it had also sparked a profound change. The confrontation with Eleanor and the subsequent revelations had forced her to face the truth about herself and her role in the family's dysfunction. As she wandered through the mansion, she reflected on the events of the previous night with a sense of resolve. In the library, Emma found a quiet corner and sat down with a heavy sigh. The walls, lined with shelves of old books, seemed to echo her thoughts. She picked up Eleanor's journal from the desk, its pages now a testament to the long-buried grievances and secrets of the family. The journal had been a crucial element in understanding the host's motives, but it also served as a mirror reflecting her own shortcomings. Emma's mind wandered back to the faces of her relatives. Each one had been affected by the revelations, and the process of coming to terms with their personal failings had begun. Old grievances were being addressed, and a sense of tentative camaraderie was starting to form. Emma knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey toward healing. As the day progressed, the family members began to gather in the mansion's main hall. The atmosphere was markedly different from the previous night's tension. There was a cautious optimism in the air, a recognition that despite the pain and conflict, there was an opportunity for renewal. Conversations were tentative but sincere, as each person sought to understand and repair the fractures in their relationships. Emma had a quiet conversation with her cousin Lydia, a woman she had not spoken to in years. Lydia, her eyes red from the night's emotional upheaval, spoke with a mix of regret and hope. "I never realized how much I had hurt others," she admitted. "But now, I want to try to make things right." Emma nodded in understanding. "We all have a lot to make amends for. It won't be easy, but it's a start." The family's interactions, though still fraught with tension, began to shift. Emma and her relatives began to share their perspectives and work toward understanding one another. The process was slow and painful, but the genuine desire to mend broken bonds was palpable. The mansion, once a place of discord, was slowly becoming a space for reconciliation. Emma's own transformation was significant. The ordeal had provided her with a clearer perspective on her life and relationships. She had spent years in isolation, avoiding the complexities of family dynamics and personal conflict. The events of the past few days had forced her to confront her own fears and insecurities, leading her to a newfound sense of closure. In the late afternoon, as the guests began to prepare for their departure, Emma stood by the mansion's entrance, gazing out at the sprawling grounds. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the landscape. The mansion, though still grand, now seemed less intimidating. It had been a crucible of truth and confrontation, but it had also become a symbol of the family's potential for healing. Emma took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm and resolution. It's time to move forward, she thought, to rebuild and to embrace the future with a clearer sense of who we are. As the guests said their goodbyes and prepared to leave, a sense of closure began to settle over the mansion. The family members had faced their darkest secrets and emerged with a greater understanding of one another. The process of healing was far from complete, but the seeds of change had been planted. In the final moments of the chapter, Emma's gaze fell upon a small, ornate box on a nearby table. It had been there throughout the evening, overlooked amid the chaos. She approached it with a sense of curiosity, wondering if it held any significance. With trembling hands, she opened the box, revealing a collection of old photographs and letters. Among the items was a letter addressed to Emma, penned by Eleanor. The letter spoke of regret, reconciliation, and a desire for forgiveness. Eleanor's words, though tinged with bitterness, also conveyed a longing for resolution and a plea for understanding. Emma's eyes welled with tears as she read the letter. It was a poignant reminder of the complexities of human relationships and the challenges of finding peace. The final twist of the story suggested that while many secrets had been revealed, some mysteries remained, hinting at the possibility of further revelations in the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma took one last look at the mansion. The journey of reconciliation had just begun, but the path forward was now illuminated by the lessons learned and the hope for new beginnings. The mansion, once a place of darkness and deception, had transformed into a symbol of the family's resilience and the potential for renewal. With a deep breath and a sense of resolve, Emma stepped out into the fading light, ready to face the future with a renewed sense of purpose and understanding. The story of the mysterious invitation had come to an end, but the journey of healing and transformation was only just beginning.